Welcome everybody to another Well-Being's Essential Conversation. We're here with Michaelis today, and I'm pumped. Excited is an understatement. We have this beautiful man, and something that he shared with me, or that he had written that I loved, was he was born in California, and when at a certain stage, he looked around and he said to God, he says, "Why?
Why am
Why
I
did
here?
you? Why the hell did you birth me into this shithole? Like what? Like, what are you doing? You're fucking punishing me here." So in that sort of orientation, he's describing his sensitivity, to the life, to the world, and then as many people who are heart-centered beings on some level, they can discover alcohol and drugs in a way that that help them sort of dampen down the hypersensitivity. So, so this was his journey, and then he discovered crime and was arrested 3 times and was on a trajectory towards, yeah, I suppose a sort of hard, lonely life in prison. But a divine inspiration, sort of intervention happened where he, an angel came along and directed him towards 12 steps, AA. And I think it was 1999 was his date for his sobriety. And wow, and he turned it around. He definitely turned it quite a few degrees in a different direction.
I didn't do shit. I really had nothing to do with it. But yeah.
So he got blown by the wind in a new direction. He surrendered. It reminds me of an old Sufi saying. It's like the sand on a desert. There's a lake, and the sand is saying, "How am I going to get over this lake?" And then the one that's, well, you're just going to have to surrender and be carried. Or you're going to become mud. And so you surrendered, you let go to it. And then, after 10 years of being a DJ, traveling around the world, living a life, struggling at times in the life, he met a guy and he found a way. He found a new way, a sort of a discovery, a sort of, I had spoken, it felt like there was like I'd unlocked some old knowledge around 12 steps, around the big book, around how to interpret it, how to use it, how to understand it. And through this distillation, he discovered a passion and a purpose, stopped being a DJ, started listening more deeper to his soul, and is now helping people dealing with the human and spiritual struggles of life, helping them find a way. So I'm honored and deeply excited to be here with you today, Michaelis. So hey, brother, welcome.
Thank you. It's actually my honor. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk here. It's awesome.
No, man, to have, for me, yeah, I love this. I love the opportunity to meet, and I love this technology. As I was saying to you, like, this is just such I'm not such a technophobic sort of person, and I'm just so blown away that we get an opportunity to be at two other corners of the world. You're in California right now. I'm in Indonesia, and we can sit and have a proverbial cup of tea together and share. So deeply grateful to you. So yeah, man. I suppose let's jump right in. Like tell us about those early years, man, in California. Where, tell me about the sensitivity. Tell me about that world that you thought, oh Jesus, what am I doing here, man? Like, what was it like for you?
It was really uncomfortable. Basically, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I just wanted to not be here. And I didn't understand this social construct of children, I didn't understand why this person was cool, why that person wasn't cool. I didn't understand why people made fun of me. I didn't understand why I needed to have the right shoes, why they were the right shoes. I didn't understand how any of that worked, and I was really sensitive to all of it. It didn't make any sense to me intuitively, because intuitively, I thought that if I was just a good person and a kind person, that's all that was necessary. But, the human condition from the get-go doesn't really work like that, especially in a societal level, and that's something I experienced at age 4 and age 5. Kids were cruel, and painfully honest, if you want to call it that. So I had a mother who basically told me that I needed to build up a wall and build up a shell, and if I didn't show them that I was hurting, then they would stop making fun of me. So my first real escapism was just dishonesty. It was wearing masks, like I was okay on the outside, but really feeling like I was dying on the inside and still having all these questions. So it didn't really solve anything, but I got good at lying. I got good at manipulating. I would, give kids my toys, in order for them to be friends with me. I'd pretend like I saw that movie and so they would be friends with me, and then they would question me about scenes. But I remember even one time this kid, when I was 6, he was asking me about one of the Aliens movies or something. And I hadn't seen it, and he was setting me up. He made up a scene that wasn't even in the movie. And I said, yeah, I saw that. He's like, you didn't even see it. And I remember just feeling mortified. I remember having to memorize the entire Beastie Boys License to Ill album just so I could hang out in the play yard. You know what I mean? Because that's every kid was reciting Paul Revere, And I did whatever I could to kind of get along, but none of it really worked. And I remember, coming home crying to my mom. Why isn't Alicia Whalen or Gracie Scharnberger, why are they making fun of me? Why aren't they holding my hand? Why couldn't you have named me Mike? Lights in our house because I was raised Jewish. It was just all that stuff that made me feel a part of. And then, there was a seriousness to my family where my father was a very stoic human being. And this is my adopted dad. I would just sort of perceive that as emotionally unavailable. And then, of course, as a self-centered being, just that I'm not loved. But later on, when I was 30, I found out that he was an assassin for the Israeli army, and he was kind of leading a strange double life, So there was that energy. And we're talking about sitting at a restaurant at a table. So here he is, folded, quiet. My mom and my grandmother are complaining about other family members. My grandfather's also sitting there quietly and kindly. And I was just looking around at this table and then seeing other tables and siblings laughing with each other and parents playing with their kids and kind of joking around. And just my feeling was I just was always wishing I was sitting at a different table. And that's kind of just how I felt about life, just wanting to be at the other table. I felt purposeless. I felt hopeless. I felt a lot of depression. And, when I was in 5th grade, I was at that place where I really wanted to die. I wanted to be off this earth, and I would beg God to take me. There were some times when I was a little kid that I wished I was a girl. I wish, you know what I mean? I just wished I was anything other than what I was. And it was just uncomfortable. And I found my parents' liquor cabinet. It started slow where, I would sneak the vanilla extract when my mom was baking a cake for my birthday, and I would drink that. Or I would always ask for my grandmother's, martini soaked olives from her martinis that she had every day. Or I would sneak the Manischewitz wine. And then eventually I, broke it into my parents' liquor cabinet or found their weed, or, you know what I mean? Just did whatever I could to sort of shut off those voices in my head, because when I started drinking and using, it wasn't about some sort of social issue. I wasn't having keg parties in 5th grade, at bonfires. I was really just trying to quiet this so I didn't want to die anymore. So that was what growing up was like for me. I just did not feel like I fit in anywhere. I was a Mexican, Filipino, Chinese Jew, you know what I mean? With the name Michaelis. What the fuck do you do with that shit, right? It was awkward, to say the least.
Wow.
So
yeah, man, when I hear you talk about it, this is, whenever you're starved so deeply, of even just the father's attention and connection, how that sets you up on a trajectory. When your mother tells you you have to hide who you really are, that sets you up on a trajectory. And then when you're sitting around in a restaurant, what a wonderful symbolic frame, where you would just want to sit at a different table where there's more life happening, where there's more connection happening, where you feel comfortable in your own being. And when all that's imbalanced, you were on a trajectory then, man. To medicate, it was nearly impossible to not. It was almost like a prophecy that would happen. It was almost inevitable. But
totally.
so what age did you discover the liquor or start drinking more from the cabinet?
So I'm going to say it was around 5th grade, 6th grade. So maybe 10, 11, I'm
Mhm.
going to say is when like I started to really, drink to knock myself out 100%. But alcohol was a big part of my family in general. I mean, like I said, my grandmother was drinking all the time, but she was a partier. I mean, she was awesome. Actually, she's one of the most lovely people I've ever experienced in my life. My mom drank a lot. She was less of that. She was a little bit more emotional, and we were really enmeshed, so it was kind of very awkward in that sense. But yeah, that's when I started. And then, gradually, I met kids who, smoked cigarettes and drank. And then when I got to the year before I entered high school, which is at 14, that summer, I met this dude who smoked weed, and, I was introduced to that, and it kind of just went on from there, you know, always chasing
Wow.
the next best feeling. And mostly I was chasing a connection to people, and I found my tribe, and they were getting high, and that was great.
Yeah, wow. And yeah, it's like you're just hungry, man. You're going, you're starved, and wherever there's a resonance is where you'll go. And often we find sometimes in those little pods, there's a common ground of brokenness in the family, or sort of some sort of sort of deep trouble in the group, or the structure, or in the society of the individual. Something, there's pain there. And it's just, you're so young. This you can't. It's just like, yeah, let's get high. Let's get some relief. Let's have an adventure.
Totally. And I don't
Takes
think
you.
that's like unique to an alcoholic or an addict. Like, I think a lot of kids, all kids probably struggle with these feelings. I mean, literally the only difference is that, and what I found out is that I actually have an allergy to drugs and alcohol. That's why it took me the way that it did, because it just unleashed this hunger inside of me that wanted more of the substance once I put it in my body. But a lot of people like feel uncomfortable. A lot of people party. People smoked weed and drank and stuff like that. Even kids, but they didn't go down the same path that I did. It's because they just don't have that allergy. But I think it's natural as a human being to want to shut off, take a load off. You know what I mean? Even today,
Yeah,
like, smoke a joint, relax, chill. I just can't do it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Me too.
Good. We got something in common. That's great.
Yeah, no, it's I never drank alcohol, but I participated, I suppose, in recreational drugs. But my how I numbed was with marijuana. And it's, wow, it's probably, yeah, it's the best part of maybe 16 years now clean. But for me, it's like I just choose to be alive. I choose to feel myself. I don't. I'm not drawn to be numbed anymore, or maybe I don't numb in that way anymore. Maybe I numb by running, or maybe I numb by having an adventure in the forest with my daughter.
But is
Or
that
it's like,
numbing, or is that just living life and having an experience?
exactly. There's a distraction for, say, it's like these engagements are like, it's like, I suppose I'll use a word that my therapist often uses, like, we got trauma, we got pain, we got suffering, we got different things that we may be working through, and regardless of that, let's move towards life anyway. Let's move an engagement. Let's move towards it. So what I was kind of meaning there is like, that's where I move to in my world. That's what, like, I don't feel that I'm deadening or dampening my soul or my spirit. I feel it's opening up a little bit.
Yeah, of
So
course, you're connecting.
yeah, well, wow, man. And so when did crime become a part of the equation?
Well, to say the least, I was a very resentful kid. I used to write shit like I wish my mother was dead, like with red crayon on my walls and punch holes in my walls. And so, I mean, I don't know if you consider it crime because it was pretty natural and I wasn't getting in trouble for it. But, I got in some fights like at a young age. And then I remember the first time that I got arrested was for aggravated assault and residential burglary. And the truth is that it was like the end of my first year of college, and I didn't really even understand why this was happening, because to me it was just a continuation of high school where kids fought all the time and no
Hmm.
one got arrested. So I think today's age is a little bit different, where everyone's just, I don't know what they are, but back then that's just how things were handled. And yeah, that was like the first time I spent time in jail. And, in my mind, it was justified. Basically, this dude had sexually assaulted my best friend's girlfriend at a party that I was at. And he called me the next morning and he was crying. And, I felt obligated to help him settle this thing. And so we did that. But we were so dumb. This guy was a Native American, and I think his father was a shaman. And so he like took me out into this like field in northern Arizona. It was beautiful. And we like smoked whatever herb and whatever pipe or whatever. And he taught me how to like use these like ninja fighting sticks, because he was one of those people. And we sat in the car dressed in all black for like days, waiting for this guy to show up back at his house so we could jump him. And he didn't. And then we decided to like, do some meth in there, thinking that was going to make that time any easier in this small car. And literally our patience went like down to zero. And we just wound up, going and knocking on the door, and his roommate was there, and he made some story about how he wanted to buy a bag of mushrooms from us or whatever. And then we went back when he was home, and we wound up putting him in the hospital. And that was the first time I got arrested. And then after that, I moved to Venice Beach, California, which is definitely not conducive to being sober if you don't want to be sober. It's just a hippie land. And I got involved in the rave scene because these people across the street from me were just going clubbing every night, going to raves every night. And they became my new family and introduced me to all those rave drugs, which I was so stoked about. It was amazing. And shortly after that, in order to perpetuate my habit, I got involved in selling drugs. Got arrested for that, fled the country, went to Israel, lived there for a little bit, a year, because they refiled my case. And then I was supposed to go to the army, but I didn't. I came back home to basically face the charges. And shortly after that, I, hooked up with the Chinese triad mafia who was manufacturing methamphetamine. And I got arrested for attempt to manufacture methamphetamine. That was the end.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. Living the dream, buddy. Living the dream.
Well, it's like, life happens. I forget the old proverb. It's like the old farmer. And his son breaks his leg, and everybody says, "Oh, such a bad thing," and the farmer says, "Maybe." And then in the hospital, he meets his wife, and everybody says, "It's such a good thing he's getting married," and the farmer says, "Well, maybe." And then she divorces him, and then it's like it's the I believe often there's no real. It's like life is directing you to some sort of it's for your betterment why you got involved with the triads or the mafia, because you got stopped or you got caught and it put you on a trajectory to. I'm imagining this is when the intervention came in.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was just talking about this last night, where if that didn't happen, I would have been dead. In fact, the night that I got arrested the last time, I was with this guy who basically owed me money. And the triad guy had threatened his life and said, "You either get this money to him tonight or I'm going to kill you." And this guy stole 700,000 pills of ephedra L from the triad guy, which I did not know about even in the car. So even that last time I got arrested, I thought I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I had all these like reasons why the universe was working against me and all that stuff. But when I think about that situation, this guy was crazy, and I probably would not have walked out of that night alive hadn't it been for the police stopping us and surprising us at that apartment, So yeah, I'm really grateful. And there I was sitting in jail with no bail. I was in the gang module, which I had not been, which they call the $1 million row, where they $1 million bails, a lot of violent criminals, and mostly people who are transporting to prison shortly. So it was a very dangerous place in Men's County Jail in downtown Los Angeles. It was a 6-man cell. It was just not a good look. And I remember being up one night talking to this guy who was on his way to federal prison, and this thought came to me out of nowhere, where it's just like, maybe drugs and alcohol are a problem for me. I never considered that before, and to me, that was literally my higher self voice speaking to me, or my God voice, whatever you want to talk about. But, I'd been living the same bottom for so many years. So why was it in that moment that it finally clicked? And it was literally 2 days after that that this guy came and visited me
Who
who,
was this? Did you know this guy, or
no,
how
his name
did?
is Bob Timmons. Bob Timmons was like, he was one of the original sober companions. But he was kind of bigger than that. So we basically traveled all over the world with different bands on tour, who were sober. He traveled to different movie sets all over the world with actors who were sober. I mean, he was pretty famous in that community. He was also one of the founders of this in custody jail program called Impact. So it was still jail, but it was 12 step. And then he was also a guy who had a direct relationship with my particular judge, and he happened to be in town and he happened to be in the office the day that my parents were talking to my lawyer because he had an office across the hall. So, I mean, all these things just sort of came into place to lift me into where I am today, which is just another reminder of a couple things. One is that I'm being taken care of no matter where I'm at and what I'm doing or what I'm thinking. Like, even when I'm at my worst, like trying to hurt people in my life,
Yeah.
something is loving me no matter what. But the other thing, it's like I'm not taking credit for anything in my life. I can't. Even in sobriety today, like I don't take credit for all the opportunities, all the people that get placed in my life to lift me up into the places that I need to be.
Mhm.
So
That's beautiful. Wow. So what was that program like? Like how was those first days in there with this whole new philosophy of the 12 steps? I'm sure it was a bit of pill to swallow at the beginning.
it was a culture shock for sure. But I mean, it was a good one. First of all, like the bus drops us off and we're outside. And I remember walking through the cafeteria first before we walked up to the dorms. And it was a dorm, which wasn't a 6-man cell. So I was grateful for that. But in the cafeteria, they had pitchers of ice water. And I hadn't seen ice water for like months. So I was like, whoa, I'm like at some fucking country club shit. You know what I mean? This is awesome. You know what I mean? And then I remember walking over these steps and there was like a koi pond. I was like, where am I right now? So I walk into this dorm and this like Latino man, short, like long braids, tattoos all over his face and neck, gangster, Guillermo, he walks up to me. He's like, it's an inside job, cuz, not an outside job. And I was like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but cool. You know what I mean? And he like tried to hug me, and that was weird. And then I remember the most shocking thing for me was every single person at night and every morning prayed. Everyone in the dorm got on their knees and prayed. I didn't come from a praying family at all. My dad basically told me he was God, and my mom didn't believe in any of that shit. So I just thought I was in some like weird fucking religious cult, And then I remember going to my first group, and I was talking in the line. We weren't supposed to be talking in the line, and one of the counselors just said to me, it was like my first day. He's like, "You're gonna fucking relapse." And I was like, "You don't fucking know me." I mean, that was my attitude at that time. So I just wasn't used to like that kind of confrontation, and I wasn't used to those kind of rules. But you know, for me, it was like the threat of going to prison for 25 years. So I just kind of shut my mouth and followed direction in the beginning. So that's what I did, and I basically learned the Serenity Prayer off of the little thing on the wall, and I wrote it down. And I remember I just say that prayer to whatever. I didn't even know what the fuck I was talking to. I didn't believe in God or anything like that. But this guy like did this really cool exercise, which was it was awesome because there was like 60 of us in this dorm. He's like, who in here doesn't know what a power grade in yourself is? And there was like us 10 new guys, and we raised our hand. We didn't have any idea. We were brand new there. He's like, okay, I want you guys to get in the center of the room, and I want you to put your arms around each other and huddle up as close to each other as you possibly could. And that was a very awkward thing because we're in jail. And then he said, I want the rest of you 50 guys to form circles tightly around those guys in the center and huddle up around them. And he said, okay, you guys in the center of the room who don't know what a power grade in you is, take 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. And we couldn't. We couldn't get any closer because the huddle, and we couldn't back up because we were surrounded by all these dudes. He said, that's a power grade in yourself. And so for me, like, it was initially the fellowship it was the men around me that became that power. And what step 2 really sort of meant to me in the beginning of my sobriety is that if in step 1, I understand that it's my thinking, my decisions, my plans that are creating all the unmanageability in my life, that if in step 2, if I talk to you guys about that stuff and I'm willing to be open-minded to your feedback, then there's some hope that I could return to sanity, and that was like clear to me. The other thing I remember was that, I was diagnosed with ADHD. Me and my mom tried to kill ourselves together when I was 17 years old. And basically it was a situation in my life that I just shoved down. I didn't even realize that it was traumatic until I was 5 years sober, when I was working in treatment and a therapist was like, wait, what? Because I was just kind of casually telling her the story. She wasn't even my therapist. We were working together, And so anyway, that happened, and she got sent to a psychiatrist, and I got sent to a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with ADHD and given meds, and she was diagnosed with depression. And none of it, the diagnosis didn't feel like it solved anything. The meds definitely didn't feel like they solved anything. And I just still felt lost. So when I was in a room full of these guys who were all sharing their stories and sharing their perceptions and how they felt about things, it was the first time in my life where I thought, oh, this is my problem. I'm an addict. This is it. And so like when they presented me with this solution of the 12 steps, I was like, I'm going to give this a shot, because nothing else worked. Medication doesn't not make me feel good. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I could just relate to what everyone was saying. So that was my experience with that. And we just basically did steps 1, 2, and 3 over and over again, for the entire time.
Well, so just to really frame, I'm sure it's been a gradual cooking process to get to the eureka moment where you said, yes, I'm all in. But as I hear you, because I'm also a group therapist, this is what I love, when you bring people together and they tell their stories, they tell the truth, they be honest, they break down. And for someone who's stepping into that for the first time, it's, of course, it's confronting, but it can be, there's a sense, you stay in there long enough, you feel the truth and you see yourself in the mix, you see that. So was it those sort of group experiences that was the sort of power in a way that helped you see, or helped you come out of the denial, or helped you come into a more clear-headedness or sober thinking to say, hey, I've got some problems. I've got addiction. And these guys, or this is where there was a feeling that was different than when you were with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, where I'm not just cognitively being labeled as a particular thing. In here, there's like a way in which I can experience it in my body, or I can allow it to move, where I can move through this place to somewhere new. Yeah, I'm curious if you can share a little bit about the sort of like what that was like in that group for you, that shaped it for you. What was it? Was there somebody who went somewhere that you weren't able to go just yet, that you saw him go there, that impacted you? Or was it something that somebody said or didn't say or struggled? Yeah, I'm curious about that cooking pot for you. Like what flavored you?
Cooking pot, there's a lot of ingredients that were involved, right? The main ingredient at the time was the threat of going to prison. So that motivated some open-mindedness for sure.
Yeah.
The second thing is that my particular counselor, I knew that I saw a shift had to have happened in him, because this guy, Louis Lopez, he was like the epitome of what you would picture a vato to be. You know what I mean? He had like the slick back fucking hair. He had the mustache. He had the little thing here. He had the tattoo like on his ear, 18th Street, like the stuff on his neck. He wore the dicky pants with the socks pulled up really high and the perfect shirt. He used to duck, like, you know what I mean? He just had that like thing. So like I knew he was a gangster. You know what I mean? Like he just was that. And I remember him, A, he was always clear. And B, for some reason, I remember this story about him walking up to an NA meeting with his girl on his arm, and some guy from his old life like was there and sucker punched him in the face. and knocked him to the ground. And he shared that he didn't do anything. He just got up and he grabbed his lady and they went away. And for me, like, for some reason that was just powerful, because I could just imagine, the pride that comes with that whole street life just welling up inside of someone. And for them to be able to walk away from that seemed really powerful. The other thing is that there were so many different age groups and so many different, people from different places in life in this group of men, and they were all sharing the same stuff. That that was powerful to me too. Just the diversity of the fellowship, all uniting on this, common peril, and then of course common solution and program of action. So there was that stuff, and then there was the investigation of looking at not so much the powerlessness as they describe in the doctor's opinion, where they really talk about the allergy, but the powerlessness over people, places, things, and situations that really resonated with me. And also the unmanageability. There was a lot of focus on the unmanageabilities as a result of my decisions and my thinking. And that was so clear to me. I mean, I'm in jail. It doesn't get much more unmanageable than that. And then understanding that I'm in jail because of my best thinking, my best decisions, that's where that ended me up. So just having these like little epiphanies here and there just chipped away at all this like denial, And I remember my parents, it took time. I mean, my parents came and visited me and they basically said, look, you have to be court committed to a sober living for a year after this. And my initial reaction to them was like, fuck that, I'd rather go to prison, because that's really where my mind was at that time. And I took some time with it. I spoke to that counselor and I made the decision to do it. But for a while, even in that program, like to get to that program, I was inspired by my family to just lie and say that you're an addict so that you can get to an easier, softer way. I mean, that was the motivation, but it was getting those moments of clarity that was like, okay, cool. No, I actually belong here.
Yeah. Wow. Just seeing how the parental, contamination in the mimicking, not only the trauma, but the mimicking of the behavioral sort of aspect, to see as you're talking, to see how you're slowly coming into an adult conscious orientation through that process. It's very powerful. I get goosebumps. I love that. I'm in the middle of doing a master's in transactional analysis. So we look at exactly that. And it's fascinating as I hear you talk about, shaking off the haunting and the echoes and the ghosts of not just your mother, it'd be her mother, mothers, all that in that moment, how you can say, you know what? No, I'm going to be honest, or like or there's enough things happening here where I'm going to try to be real about it, and I'm going to do it from a different orientation. Man, that's powerful. It's so powerful.
From the best of my ability,
Yeah.
Because the truth is that even honesty is an evolutionary process. It's not something that just happens, So I got as honest as I could for sure back then. I'm getting more honest even today,
Yeah, it's I love how you said evolutionary process, because we'll be thinking we're honest, but as time goes by, then we can reshape it or modify it in some way, or deepen the truth, or clear the sort of steam or the fog of how we see the world. But wow, man, and how was that sort of 1 year in sober living for you? Was that was in California?
Yeah, that was in California. First of all, my parents told me, oh, it's just going to be like a fraternity house with guys who are like sober. But it wasn't like that at all, bro. I remember I came in on the 7th or something, or I got released on the 8th. So I got there on the 8th. I went straight from jail to the sober living house. And all the guys were really friendly. The manager was kind of weird, but friendly kid, But I got along with everybody. And I remember sitting down at the dinner table, because we all had dinners together. And we did these things called attitude checks, where everyone writes a positive and negative on somebody else. And they put it in a jar and we read it anonymously, right?
Okay.
And I hadn't met the director of the house, and I didn't even know he was the director, but this guy comes and sits down. He's from Kentucky. He's got like a hair lip and like a lisp. He's deaf, and he looks kind of like Jabba the Hutt. And I remember he just started yelling at someone. You shut the fuck up, you fucking, like just yelling at people, just tearing them apart. And I was just like, where am I? Like, what the fuck is happening around me? You know? So it was a very intense, very confrontational, very behavioral modification based attack therapy. People were not talking to each other kindly in those attitude checks. And it was an interesting culture for sure. I learned a lot though. I learned a lot of very simple things, from how to wash a toilet, you know what I mean? And how to stay in the moment through having a bathroom chore and understanding that I'm not going to clean the mirror perfectly if I'm thinking about the sink, you know? So I need to do one thing at a time, step by step. I learned about, you know, awareness of the moment. You know, basically, if I had my shoes on the carpet, I would get a 2,500 word essay. And I had to, if I got a 2,500 word essay or anything above 1,000 words, I couldn't speak to anybody in the house. I couldn't look at anybody in the house. I had to sit at a separate table. If I spoke, I would get another 1,000 words. Like, so it was just a lot of different stuff in that way. And I learned about humility. I learned more about the unmanageability as a result of my thinking. But, you know, they did stuff like get me to meetings every night and had me look at my different behaviors. A lot of stuff with women and lust they had me look at early on. Of course, I mean, I continued to fuck that up for years later in sobriety. But, yeah, they got, you know, had me get a sponsor, start working steps. They were very hands-on in how I moved through those steps and how often I was calling my sponsor. We had group every Thursday night, and every dinner was a potential group. And we had family groups on Saturdays, which was cool because they really inspired all the families to go to Al-Anon. So it was a real,
I love that.
Yeah, it was great. And the cool thing about it was that the families were, you know, just as easily confronted as the people. So were all the managers. So, I mean, it was a very sort of tense and intense situation for everybody, you know, but it was great.
Yeah, I love that. I love whenever there's like a sort of family systems, or like you bring the family together in a way where, you know, it's not just the son's the problem here, you know,
Totally.
and that's so rich. And wow, man, that's I like that. I didn't know that there was that style of aftercare from those sorts of residential programs. I know it's some of it, the confrontational parts of what you're sharing. You know, I've, you know, I disagree with some of that, but a lot of what you're sharing, you know, it's great stuff. It's uncomfortable, real. You know, like you're being shaped through the process. It's abrupt, but there's some gold in it.
I disagree with some of it too. Not so much in the message itself, but how the message was conveyed.
Yeah.
I think that, and this is kind of my approach too with people when I'm in those environments, is that I think that there's a softer, more audible way of conveying the same message as opposed to one that's so abrasive, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's a better.
You know, I think it's like there's many styles of psychologies, and the one that I would lean towards would be we build the safety first, and then we can be disturbing if need be. But you can't just be disturbing without any sort of like connection or ground between you and the other. It's for me. I find it for some characters, it doesn't work. It's too much to comprehend. It reenacts sometimes things that happened earlier in their childhood, and it's hard. It's super hard. But I agree with that. And see, as you went through that 1 year. What when you got to the end of the year, were you ready to leave, or what, did it feel scary to leave? Like, how was that transition for you?
I didn't really leave exactly because I started managing the house after, you know, so I stayed on for a bit of time. And I mean, graduating that house was the first big accomplishment that I know that I worked hard and I followed through and finished something, because it was not easy, you know, and I failed out of college. I barely made it through high school. I quit guitar lessons and piano lessons and I quit everything in my life at some point, so to do something like this felt really good. And one of the things that like that house sort of instilled, which is probably not amazing, was sort of this idea of like, if you graduate this house, you're untouchable, because of the kind of work that you put in. So I did feel confident in that sense, but I created a lot of unmanageability in myself early on in sobriety. I dated a girl who had more time than me, was older than me, and I got her pregnant, and we had a baby, and I cheated on her, and I wound up having custody of my son for a while until maybe he was 5 or 5.5. There was a lot of shame and stuff around all that because my biological father cheated on my mother, and I was really brought up with this sort of mixed messaging from my mom, where it was like my biological father was the biggest piece of shit in the world, philanderer, just all that stuff. So I had a lot of shame around sex. But then there was like this sort of emphasis of pushing me towards sexuality too, going out and pointing out that pretty girl, or even being at the sushi bar as a young child and sort of thinking it's cute that I'm flirting with the gay man. You know what I mean? Just like stuff like that, like was
Confusing.
really confusing as a kid. So the whole sexuality stuff in sobriety came with a lot of shame for me, to be quite honest. So I dealt with that pretty immediately. And I remember this girl, shared from the podium at the meetings that I went to about what a piece of shit I was and how I cheated on her. And, so kind of like AA became not so much of a safe place. And so it made me more dependent upon the house itself, which is also didn't feel safe either because of all the shame and shaming that goes on there, or at least that's how I perceived it. I mean, they were just having me look at the truth about myself, but because of the way that they, convey that message, and because it's an entire group of 20 guys coming at you in that way, it feels overwhelming,
Yeah.
So
yeah, again, too much, too quick, too soon. It's too, again, another reenactment of, what your mother was saying about your father, and here was another woman saying it about you, like just, and the family of AA was, you were perceived again that you like, partially, and maybe also with your own thinking, just again, I'm alone, or I'm rejected, I'm not loved, I'm bad, I'm not good enough. Like that's harsh, man. It's like
and it like
sorry.
shaped how I
Yeah.
heard people share in meetings too. Like I remember at that time of my sobriety, like hearing speakers get up from the podium talking about how they got sober and they got honest. And that was not my experience. Like I didn't just get honest. In fact, now I feel like honesty is very subjective, like we talked about. It's perception, right? So
Mhm.
I definitely felt just not a part of, and I didn't have an understanding that, the spiritual experience or God powered personality change takes time. That it doesn't make sense to undo, a decade of behavior in a year or 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5, it takes time for that process to happen. And, I wanted to get well really quick. I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to impress my parents. I wanted to impress the director of the sober living. I wanted accolades. I was still in that validation seeking stuff. So it was just a really strange time for me. And, it drove me to be secretive, of course, not talk about what was really going on with me and how I really felt, which is, one of the most dangerous things because, once we start talking to each other, we realize that we're all dealing with the same shit. And it's only by keeping the secrets that we create that divide that perpetuates more shame and guilt, which just destroys us from the inside, right? So it's like a very, counterintuitive thing.
Yeah, it's the defensive behavior that creates the very thing we are trying to defend against, which is hard, painful, true human reality. That, and again, for people out there who are listening, like, hiding, keeping secrets, you know, how that breeds shame and guilt.
Or
And maybe
judgment,
sometimes judge,
fear,
yeah, yeah,
you know?
self defeat, self criticism. you know, and then we project that onto other people, and it just goes round and round. So again, for those listening who has a tendency or has a part of their character that does that, then maybe look around to see if there's a friend or a therapist or a group. Come and talk about what that is. You know, take that first uncomfortable step towards not being so, you know, sort of held hostage by whatever it is that you're holding in. It's really important to share. At least take the step towards the discomfort for some of us in sharing. It's not easy, but it's worthwhile. But yeah, man. So you got out of that. Like, what was the key places over the next 10 years before you discovered a new way? What stands out, man? What stands
Oh,
out?
man.
You
Lots of.
traveled around the world. How did you get into the DJing? Like, what? Tell us a little bit about that time.
I got into DJing doing a bunch of drugs, actually. I mean, I had that family of people that we traveled around, and one of them had turntables at his house, and he was not an amazing DJ. And so I just thought to myself, like, I can't be any worse than that. So can you just show me like what this shit is? Because I was interested in it. And I found a real love for it. And how I knew that I was passionate about it was there was a period of time where I was homeless and I was living in my friend's garage every once in a while, and he just had crates and crates of records in there, and he would be out, you know, selling drugs, and I would just be playing records. And I remember, you know, one of the girls that I was seeing at the time, there was a couch set up behind me. I remember she took off all of her clothes and she was just laying there on the couch, and I was just not interested, you know, which for me was like a big deal at that time because I was fucking very interested. Like, sexual validation was like my lifeline for so long. So I saw that this was something I was really passionate about. And so I did that, got sober. The sober living was definitely not down with me being a DJ at all. They were like, fuck that, dude, you're out of your mind. Like, you know, so I put that aside for a while. And I remember at a year and a half sober, one of the, you know, friends of family. So you have to apply to be able to come to groups and stuff like that. This guy, Jason Deo, came and hung out, and he looked familiar to me. And he also was a DJ. And I remember he took me at a year and a half sober to my first party. And I wound up running into all my old friends there. And that was an eye-opening experience because I just saw that they were, and I was like, okay, cool. I don't want to go back to that. But he, you know, I would go to his house. We would get like hot wings and fucking spin records. And then, you know, my uncle who's passed away, he bought me my first set of turntables, which I still have in sobriety. And I was, you know, playing in my bedroom and just like enjoying that stuff. And then I saw this movie Scratch that came out, and it inspired me to go beyond just house music and practice different techniques. And then my buddy Todd Burke, also dead, he OD'd. He basically was a promoter at the time, and he had brought the exotic erotic ball from San Francisco down to LA. And he asked me to play it. And I got to play with all the people that I went to go and see and sort of worship as DJs, which was a great experience for me. It was really fun and really bizarre playing fucking music while someone's like whipping somebody on the floor and shit. Like, you know, it was interesting. And yeah, then I, you know, basically was still working in treatment, working at different treatment centers, and I would DJ, you know, every once in a while at these different clubs. I would work at a bar back at a club for a little bit. So, you know, they would give me an opportunity to DJ, but it wasn't so serious. And then I met this woman who was very wealthy and very famous, and just gave me an opportunity because I didn't have to pay for anything to just do that, you know, and not have to worry about a day job. And she also introduced me to a bunch of people that, you know, booked me to do different things like in Russia or sometimes in Europe or Miami or whatever. And because she basically knew everybody. And that kind of lifted me up to a place. And then we ended that relationship, and I thought it was going to be the end of the world, but it wasn't. And in terms of my career, you know, and yeah, I mean, just people were placed in my life a lot of times through AA. Would introduce me to different relationships. And I remember I was introduced to this guy, Suck, who was a big promoter at this club in Hollywood, who's also dead now. And he booked me to play his birthday. And this place was called Supper Club. And I'd been DJing, quite a bit in Los Angeles at that time, but this was like a big deal. And I remember he asked me to open up for Doc Martin. And Doc Martin was like someone that I used to go see all the time, loosely friends with or whatever. And then maybe 6 hours before that show, he said, actually, we're going to have Doc Martin open for you. And I said, what? I didn't hear you right. And he said, yeah, he's going to open for you. So I remember getting to Supper Club and seeing Doc. And the first thing I said to him was like, bro, I don't feel right about this. Like, you should definitely be closing DJ, like, I love you. And he gave me a hug and whatever. But that was like the real launch of my career, because it just exposed me to being able to play with all kinds of different people. Many famous people came in there. It was like kind of the Hollywood hotspot for a while. And through that, I got a manager. She got me a NASCAR gig where I was touring all around with NASCAR and producing music with them and DJing their driver intros. And, I just started playing at different clubs all over the United States. And then, like I said, I was in Russia before, and then I moved to Indonesia, and it, did all that. So Southeast Asia stuff. And it's been cool. That's how, yeah.
Wow. Taken by the wind again.
Always, it was just always people being placed in my life that elevated me to new places, because I'm certainly not the best DJ in the world, but the opportunities always came, And I think being sober helped, because I was not like, you could find me. I wasn't passed out in the corner, you know what I mean? Or I wasn't like not showing up because I like had a late night or a late month, you know what I mean? Like, so it was reliable, which was helpful.
Yeah, responsive. You had answered the door if somebody knocked. And,
totally.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next knock that came on your door. How did that happen? Where you got to find a new way, find something. Walk me through that.
Okay. I'm going to back up a little bit. So at 5.5 years sober, I tried to kill myself, and same again at 6.5 years sober. That's kind of just important, just for the sense that like things were really unmanageable within me. I was experiencing a lot of spiritual malady, a lot of frustration. I was doing a lot of like trying to manage defects of character, thinking that I could change myself. What was told to me in AA was, if you're feeling fucked up, call your sponsor. If you're, experiencing fear and resentment, do another inventory. And I just found myself like writing the same things in inventory every single time, and just like not getting the relief that I wanted. So I got to this place where I just stopped believing that AA worked. And that was because I didn't know what AA was. I just knew what the fellowship was telling me AA was. And that director of the sober living was sponsoring me towards this end before I had this new awakening. And we had this weird falling out where he basically accused me of being loaded. It's a very weird thing. So the story goes like this. I was sponsoring this guy that he was attracted to, who used to be in Liberty House. And they had this weird flirtation thing. And so it was this weird like enmeshment thing where, Larry would be talking to me about Ben and how to deal with things with Ben. It was just like a weird thing. And Ben came to me one day and he was like, I've been drinking a bunch of kombucha and I've been feeling some kind of way about it, And I said, well, you should probably stop drinking kombucha. I said, I've drank kombucha, but I don't feel anything from it. But if you're feeling something, stop and I'll stop too. So immediately I called Larry. I was like, Larry, Ben came to me with this thing. This is what I told him. He was like, cool. I come over to Larry's house one night and Ben's there. And Ben gets honest about how the fact that he's been taking his meds a little bit earlier too, his night meds, just so he could feel the effect, And so basically we talked to him and he changed his date. And then he went back into the house that Larry's the director of, which was kind of inappropriate, but whatever, it was what it is. And then I think that Ben was spiteful that I was sort of overlooked. And he was in Larry's ear basically saying, like, I don't fucking believe Michaelis. Been getting drunk. So I think I was in Paris at this time. So Larry had this conversation with me, and I was like, okay, I'll be home in a couple of weeks. Let's have a talk about it, you know? And I basically got this email that Larry had sent out to all the graduates and all the families and all the people of Liberty House saying that I had relapsed with, you know, just under 10 years of sobriety. And for me at that time, it was really powerful because I had literally done everything fucked up sober. Everything. Like everything that I'd done high, I'd done sober, just sober. So my sobriety itself was literally the one thread that I was holding on to for hope. So to have that being questioned, it like really fucked with me. Mm-hmm. And I just felt really betrayed. It was just like, you know, fuck, I can't trust anybody, you know? And then he like posted something on Facebook about it too. He didn't mention my name, but anyone who knew would know. And I just felt really like betrayed. So my girlfriend at the time did some research on the brand of kombucha that I was drinking, and it happened to be that it was completely non-alcoholic. There was no trace elements or any of that stuff, you know? And so I just sent him a screenshot of that with the title, "Fuck You." And that was the end of that relationship, you know? And that's where I was at. So, you know, being a DJ at that time, I thought that I needed to find a sponsor that was in the music industry. And so I asked this guy, Cliff, if he would sponsor me. He was a big A&R guy out here. And he said no, you know, and he said, I've got too many people on my sponsor doesn't want me to take on any new sponsees. Later on, I found out he was lying. He was actually loaded. He didn't have 26 years, and he OD'd and died shortly after that. But he said, I've got this guy who really knows his shit. His name is Deezer. Call him up. Here's his number. So I said, cool. So I called up Deezer, and he said, do you have a 4th edition hardcover big book, a pen and a highlighter? I said, no, but I'll get it. He's like, okay, cool. Get that and meet me at my house at Tuesday at 8 a.m. And so I said, great. So I showed up Tuesday at 8 a.m. at his house. Well, I think I showed up at 8:02 or something. And he opened up the door and he said, you're late, and closed it. And that was how we first met. And then I showed up the next week at 7:55. And, you know, that's how all that unfolded, you know. And I remember the very first thing that we wrote in the book is, God, take away everything I think I know about this book, about this process, and about you, God, so I can have an experience with you. And I understood the idea of taking away everything I thought I know about the program. I needed to do that because I needed a clean slate, and everything that I'd done thus far had not done anything for me. But I never considered taking away everything I thought I knew about God, and what it would even be like to have an experience with God, which I so wanted, you know, because that was really the missing piece. I didn't have an understanding of God, and I definitely did not feel a conscious contact with that power in my life. You know? The next thing that we wrote was, God, please bury my pride before my pride buries me. And really understanding even like what pride was and how powerful that is, you know, and understanding that like, the ego is just the base sense of self, and then the inflated sense of self and the deflated sense of self are how pride works in my life, and just seeing it just unfold in all my stuff and utilizing that prayer literally all through my day. Every time I walked into a meeting, anytime I was in the car, anytime I had an interaction with anybody, or even just sitting by myself, I'd see how, you know, these negative self-talk voices would go, or these judgmental, arrogant talk voices would go, or my reactions to people, or my self-centeredness. I just saw all this stuff and just continuing to say this prayer and trying to do some contrary action with it, you know, but then also not beating myself up when I wasn't able to come through with that contrary action, because that's just my pride too. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, the next thing that we did was we wrote, alcoholism is a disease of the body, mind, and spirit. There are 3 parts of the program, one for each part of my disease. And when that was broken down for me, that was the hit. That was the spiritual awakening, not the spiritual experience, but the awakening. And it was the first time that I understood what alcoholism was. I understood that I had an allergy to alcohol and drugs, that I couldn't put it in my body, that it had nothing to do with trauma, something I was born with, something that I'll die with, so I can never pick up again. I was able to see how the allergy was not a mental desire for something. It was a physical craving. And how I saw that was when I was out there getting high, opportunity still presented itself to me. The universe is always working in my favor, right? Like it doesn't stop doing that. So I remember I was modeling at the time when I was young, and I got an opportunity to be on hold for a Jill Sanders campaign. And it was like the biggest thing that I'd done. And I remember the night, that I heard that, I went out to celebrate with my friends. We went to the Garden of Eden, and yeah, I was just gonna like have fun. And that fun turned into 4 months later in another jail sentence. And I saw how my mental intention was one thing, but once I put the drugs and alcohol in my body, it took me somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I realized, okay, that's the allergy right there. The mental obsession, as it's described in the fellowship, is like someone who's thinking about drinking and using all the time, which is something I never really related to. Because I was high all the last 3 years of my using. There was not a moment where I wasn't high. So I didn't have to think about it. I didn't even have to think about where I was going to get it, because I was always sidling up with people who were either dealing drugs or manufacturing drugs. So I had like an abundance, right? But it was explained to me that the mental obsession is the ability to believe a lie. The lie that I believe is that I don't have the allergy in the end. But there's all these lies that I tell myself that lead me to that end game lie, and I need to break that pattern of, denial basically. And then finally, the spiritual malady is just like the anger, the depression, the anxiety, the fear, the worry, the feeling hopeless, the feeling purposeless, the feeling lost, the feeling not a part of, disconnected, like all that stuff, all that emotional unmanageability was explained to me was a spiritual malady. So now I saw like a full picture of not just alcoholism, but the human condition. Because really the only thing that defines me as an alcoholic is that I have this allergy. Everybody lies to themselves. If you question that, go fucking look on social media. And everyone like has spiritual malady. That's the human condition. In fact, fucking people are handing out diagnosis after diagnosis that are really just like spiritual malady shit. Like that's it. So then, sorry, I got to plug my computer in.
Yeah, man, the psychosis of diagnosis. Often I find just some of the environments that I've been in is I find that the diagnosis is more a sort of protection of the therapeutic prelace of the therapist to maintain their fantasy about how great they are. It's like there's a way in which it's put in a box and that says that they know what it is. But yeah, it's that I agree with you. I think it's very powerful how you're putting this, and I'm loving how through that process you were like, it was kind of like, it felt like, I don't know if it was willpower, but you were still holding on to the fact that you were in sobriety for those 10 years, and throughout that time life was still falling apart in different ways, and that there was times when you wanted to really exit with suicide, and then you were, and then it was like it was getting to, I don't know how long you were going to be able to hold on to that piece. It felt like it was tentative, and then at the right time, he came in and then got just got this doctorate of a whole new way of understanding what the work is.
Totally. Yeah, it was really important. And the most important was really the understanding of how the program works. And I think this is like the biggest mistake that people in the fellowship make, is the message that's conveyed there. So it was explained to me that the way that I treat my body, or that physical allergy, is through the unity aspect of the triangle. And the unity is basically found in the fellowship. So it's simply this: when I'm hanging out with another person who's 12 steps sober, I'm not at the bar, I'm not at the dealer's house, I'm not alone in my house getting high and drunk. I'm not like in some weird crack motel with some crack people doing crack shit. Like I'm literally not putting my body in a position to ingest drugs and alcohol. If I don't ingest it, I don't trigger the allergy. Period. That's it. You know, it doesn't say anything about the meetings being there to find connection or to hear recovery or to, you know, see that girl or to, I mean, none of that stuff. It's literally to treat the body, right? The way that I treat my mind is through the first 164 pages of the book, because that's where the recovery is found, right? So the integrity of the 12-step message, which, look, the 12 just for Alcoholics Anonymous, like, and it's not a new message. This whole process of connecting to a power greater yourself through essentially being the blessing is not new. I mean, if you look at all spiritual practice, the foundation, or all religious practice, the foundation, not what human beings have warped it to be, but really the message. It's about loving and creating harmony in the moment around you, right?
Absolutely.
So basically, if I want to treat that mental obsession, that ability to believe a lie, I need to be in that book, right? That's where that message is going to be. It's not necessarily going to be in the meetings. So, like, understanding that created a less meeting dependent style of recovery for me today, you know, and it also erased a lot of those judgments that I had when I went to meetings. I go to meetings and I hear someone speak or share it, and I'd be like, ah, dude's a fucking preacher. That person's always fucking complaining. I'd always like have these judgments. Or I'd see someone with less time than me and share about promises happening for their life. And I'd be like, fuck that guy. Like, why does he get that? And I don't. You know what I mean? Like, all that was erased because I was there to treat my body, and that was it, you know? Now, the third piece, which also makes meetings, like the other aspect of meetings, is treating my spirit. So how I treat that emotional manageability, or how I perfect and enlarge my spiritual life, or how I create a relationship with God, or how do I gain access to that power of God, which is so necessary, is through service. Now, service is a really broad word, right? Service is any act of love and kindness, from when you're going to the gas station and seeing the gas station attendant and asking them how they're doing. It's, you know, doing a charity work. It's anything, right? But for me, as an alcoholic or an addict, the most efficient way for me to be of service is literally to take as many people through the big book as I possibly can. And the reason why is that's the only way that I can work all three sides of the triangle simultaneously. And that is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and should be all the Anonymouses, you know, because where do I find those people? I find them at meetings. So I'm going to meetings to look for people to help. So I'm treating my body. Who am I sitting across from when I'm sitting across from someone with the book? I'm sitting across from another alcoholic, still treating my body. What am I reading with them? I'm reading them the book, so I'm treating my mind. And what am I doing when I'm basically teaching the book? I'm being of service. So I'm treating mind, body, and spirit like over and over, which, you know, the next thing that was written in my book was, this process is not to make me depend on a sponsor, but to enable me to become dependent upon God. A sponsor can't save himself or herself, right? So it also erased that whole thing. I mean, I started to understand where the word sponsor even came from, where I didn't even know that. Because I don't know, like, how the culture is out there so much, but like here, the sponsor is like your therapist, or it's your guru, the person who has all the answers for everything. And the truth is that no one has that shit. You know, like, if I really want to feel better, calling my sponsor to complain about my problems that day because whatever is not going to help me. But being of service will, you know. So when I was in emotional manageability, instead of calling my sponsor, instead of writing another inventory, I get in the book with somebody. So that's what really like changed. And I started going to more meetings to find more people. And now today, like, I honestly hardly have to go to any meetings. I speak at a meeting and I pick up 4 new people to take through the book. So my plate is like very full, you know what I mean? And I say yes to every single person that ever asks me. I never say no. I never fire anybody, because literally every single person that I'm able to be of service to is basically my opportunity to connect to God. Why would I ever edge that out of my life? It makes no sense. So just understanding that changed my whole like idea of AA. And the other thing was that he said, okay, cool. In this hour, we're going to get through whatever we can get through in terms of the book, right? But for the next 6 days, before we meet again, I want you to take as many people as you possibly can through those pages that we went through, right? So immediately working all three sides of the triangle. Immediately.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
like work all 12 steps and then you can help somebody. That doesn't even make sense, you know? Like what people are saying in meetings today when they're telling you that is like, okay, cool. Go to 7 meetings a week and treat your body. Okay. Then meet with your sponsor once a week. Maybe you're in the book. A lot of people aren't even in the book. They're reading 12 and 12 or doing worksheets or whatever, just having conversations. So maybe once a week you can treat your mind. So that's 6 days of insanity. And then spiritual malady until you finish all 12 steps, right? So that sometimes takes 6 months to a year. So by the time you're completed with the 12 steps or whatever, you're so fucked up. But somehow you're expected to like sit in a meeting and be so attractive because it's a program of attraction rather than promotion that people are going to flock to your fucked up self that has to be lying from the podium in order to present this thing that you know inside. Ask you to help them. Like, what the fuck is that? That's literally insane, right?
Yeah, well, like it's like it feels like I love how you're framing it. It feels like that classical style of 12 steps has you starved in so many levels, and then you're supposed to be able to be somehow been able to, like feed others from that state of starvation. And what you're talking about is how you just keep filling yourself up with all these levels, and then you're in a sort of, and then immediately are helping people from that filled state. It makes total sense. I love it. It's
Yeah.
like you've completely flipped my take on 12 steps. And I've so much I want to write about this, because for me, I find there's gold in so many different doorways towards helping the heart in everybody, and helping the mind, or helping the spiritual aspect. And this is just, to me, this is the most clearest anybody has described a new way of looking at this. Pretty, it's in every town in the world, to be honest, in the Western world anyway. And it does help people, but I meet so many people it does not help. And this new frame that you're talking about, it just simplifies it, and it makes total sense, man. Like,
Right?
yeah, I love it. I love it.
What's
And
funny? Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
but tell me, like, what's the name of the book that you've written? So I'm imagining it's all about this, right?
Yeah, totally. So I wrote a book called The Spiritual Revolution and
Okay.
A Precise Path to Personal Peace. And basically, I've I've been doing this big book stuff, this AA Alcoholics Anonymous book for the last 12 years and practicing it literally every day with at least one up to 6 or 7 people per day, so, and it's evolved and changed like my whole concept of God, the program, and pretty much every sentence in that book has changed. And basically, what I have seen, especially with the pandemic or whatever you're calling this thing, is a lot of really having a lot of spiritual malady. And there was 2 like really big sort of catalysts to launch me in this direction. The first was I was speaking at a meeting in New York from Bali via Zoom, and I was sharing about my big book, you know what I mean, the AA book, and I was saying, "Oh, I have this thing written in my book," and I said what it was, and I got all these messages in the chat like, "Where can I find your book?" And I was like, "Oh, I was actually just talking about my AA book," but it was like, "Oh, I should write a book." And then shortly after that, a friend of mine, this young kid, Sivyov Dixon, he like was probably the most fast-tracked in terms of talent and skill and music knowledge, up and coming DJs in Bali. Like amazing. I saw this kid like start at Genja as like the closing set person. And then he's like playing with Anderson Paak and like a full turntablist, and like just watching this kid grow. And, we would talk about a lot of stuff in the music industry, and he had a really sort of like, you know, not so positive view of it. And I could understand. I mean, I related to him with all that stuff, just the whole culture itself. But he wound up throwing himself off the bridge in Uluwatu, you know, on, I think it was like New Year's Day.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just thought like, fuck, you know, this kid had such a bright future, you know, ahead of him. Like he was literally on the cusp of launching himself into a place where all those things that he was bummed about, like he wouldn't even give a shit, you know, and just to been able to help somebody like that, because he would call me and talk to me, and there's literally only so much I can do for a non-addict or non-alcoholic because they don't have that process or a tool like the book to pass on to other people, to get outside of self, to connect to God, to launch themselves in the moment, all these things that I've basically, and connect with another human being, all these privileges that I've got from working this program, like people don't have. And so I was like, I need to write that book for those people. So that's what I did. I wrote a book that's modeled order-wise off of how the big book is written, basically, just about drugs and alcohol and focusing just on the human condition, and also it being a tool, a practice. It's a workbook as well. You know, it's an interactive book that people need to do with each other. So it works all sides of their triangle, if it's even going to be a triangle. But yeah, that's the deal.
Wow. Wow. And where can people get this book, Mike?
They can't get it yet. So it's not published yet. I have a manager actually working on that right now. So, you know, as soon as it's ready to be done, it's done, but it's written. So we'll see. You know, it's not up to me. You know?
Damn it! That's great. That's great, audience. You keep them hungry, man. But no, I understand it'll happen when it happens. But the book's done, and it's just a matter of time to get it out there, right?
I'm so excited about this. I mean, I'm so excited for people, and I just am excited to help, like, everybody. You know, I mean, I really feel like this is my legacy and this is my bigger purpose because, you know, once I did this whole book thing, I put up YouTube videos taking people through the book through the exact process that I went through, you know, so people could do that for people who don't have access to that or have no one who's ever taken them through the book. Like they can look at the YouTube and use that as a tool to work their book with other people. So I did that and I thought that, okay, cool, now I can die. But then like there was like something else that I needed to do. But like once this book is done and out, like I really feel like, you know, aside from teaching it to people, you know, I've done what I needed to do on this earth. So that's it.
Well, maybe there might be something else that might keep you around a little bit longer. That might pop up to the surface, man. Because it's a real pleasure to be with someone with such a big heart. You know, where it's all about, you know, really exchanging, you know, that love, man. You know, just wanting to help people help direct people back to getting in touch with their own love, you know, and the love of, you know, a sort of more in aligned life through being able to work through the chaos of it, you know, the reality of that. So as we're coming to the end here, brother, what would be something that you'd like to say to an addict who's watching? Um, Apart from for the people who are watching, if you want access to mix stuff, just please message. If you have someone who's hurting, who's struggling, you can message well-beings, and we can hook you up. But Mike, what would be something that if someone's watching this now or later, or someone sends this to somebody who's struggling at whatever stage of the struggle, what would you like to say to them?
Um, if you're breathing, there's still hope, no matter what. Um, that you're much bigger than your addiction. You're much bigger than your job. You're much bigger than your partner, your role in people's lives. Um, to understand what a power greater myself is, it's not necessarily something that's outside of myself. It's a power greater than myself, right? It's my self-centeredness and my selfishness and my self-pity and that stuff. So there's an opportunity to connect to your higher self, and your highest self really, like what we're talking about, wants to love unconditionally. You know, so find a practice that allows you to do that. And if you are an addict or an alcoholic, the big book is a really simple way to do it because the book's already written for you. You don't have to think. You don't have to come up with anything. You just need to show it to somebody else. There's a method to teach it. If you want to learn that method, you can ask me or anyone that I've worked with. I can teach that to you. It's really simple. And yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about all this is that, and really understanding what we are, being the light of God, that's where the joyousness at all times comes from, because it's really about like what we can bring to each moment rather than what we can take, and really like bring without any expectation of reciprocation, and understanding that the universe is going to constantly pay us out like beyond what we can fathom. And that will happen for you 100%. And you will be able to become literally the master of your own experience. Because what you'll get through this process is tapping into a power which will allow you the power of choice, choice of perception, which will lead to choice of feeling, which will lead to choice of experience. And that is the most powerful gift of all. So just hang in there. It's not hopeless. That's it.
Wow. And for all these people who are not drug addict or alcoholic, and if you're interested in Mike's book, then just message me, and I'll keep hounding him until he lets me know when it's been released. And
I can't wait.
let me know.
I know.
But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. It's a real honor to bring people together who have been in the fight of life and have come through the other side with some deep seated learning, some deep knowing, and to have at times these sorts of angels on the show, like Mike here, and whose hearts just on the line all the time in service to other people. It's a great honor. I'm hoping that you can take something away from this. Again, if you're watching it on the repeat, just sit and feel what happens as you hear us exchange. Just notice what comes alive, what resonates, what gets invoked in you. And if you liked anything that you saw, please hit a share or hit a like or make a comment or subscribe, because it really helps us reach more people. It would be amazing if you could do that. And hey, man, Michaelis, brother, thank you so much, man, for being here with us today. And we might be doing some more stuff in the future together, because your heart's just great to be around. Thank you, my man.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been real, everybody. So same time next week, we'll be back, and take care. Reach out. Talk to somebody.